All right, Zach Berman is here, one of our favorites, one of the best beat writers in the country. He hosts the PHLY Eagles show with Bull Wolf every day at noon on YouTube. What's going on, brother?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. Have you confronted any Kelce's in parking lots of vacation towns in the Philadelphia area lately?
Well, I know exactly where that was. Actually, my in-laws were at the restaurant the same night. Coincidentally,
Whoa.
that was not my in-laws in the video. But no, I've spoken to Jason in parking lots, but I've never confronted Jason nor Kylie in a parking lot.
That's a good move. It's a good move
Yes.
from what I can find. We're going to start here. Speaking of Jason Kelce, it's interesting because I've heard a lot of smart people talk about how impactful that retirement's going to be to the organization. And I heard, I think it was Brian Baldinger on Chris Long's podcast 2 weeks ago, talking about how like every single protection for 13 years was made in consultation with Jason Kelce. And he was in every meeting. And that just goes beyond what his influence was in the locker room and with young players. And a lot of times that can be overrated. A lot of times that can be overrated because I remember a couple of years ago talking to a coach and I was like, oh, yeah, well, they've got this guy. He can teach the young players. And they're like, no, 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 no. A lot of times older players just trying to protect their own jobs and, stealing money and lying about whether or not they're helping the guys just so they can get it. Jason Kelce was not that. Jason Kelce was the real deal in that locker room. What do I need to understand about Jason Kelce leaving and the Eagles' plan to replace that institutional knowledge and the play? Remember, he was still a beast on the
Yeah.
field.
Yeah, I'm glad you framed the question that way because much of the dialogue in Philadelphia is about how do you replace this leadership void from
Yep.
Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox. And my answer to that is always I'd be more concerned with the football part of it, right? Like they'll figure out the locker room. The football part of it, this guy's a Hall of Fame player. And I think beyond the play, beyond what you see on television and those watching this right now have all seen the clips of Jason running 30 yards downfield on a screen. It's the fact that everything at the line of scrimmage runs through him. And really, it transitioned, I think it was back in 2011 when Howard Mudd kind of put the responsibility on to Kelce from Michael Vick. And Kelsey's been controlling everything at the line of scrimmage ever since. And now they're without Kelce in there. Cam Jurgens is going to take over at center. It's a different offensive system. So I'm curious to see whether Jalen Hurts takes more of the responsibility at the line of scrimmage, whether it's Cam Jurgens. But the thing with Jason Kelce too is that his offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland has been coaching him since 2013. Those guys finish each other's sentences. Jeff Stoutland is a big part of putting the run plan together. Everything that happens with the Eagles running game, with the Eagles offense, frankly, kind of involve Jason Kelce. So without Jason there, just in terms of making sure everything's going smoothly, there's a big void. But I think where the Eagles will miss him most is that you win in this league with blue chip players, and they had a blue chip player at center.
Completely agree. It was funny, Mitch Schwartz was on this pod last year and he said that he thought that Jason Kelce was the most valuable, essentially non-skill player in the NFL because of what he allowed them to do, and that the tush push, he had comped the tush push almost to like old school field goal blocking, where it's like it's like kind of rugby style, whatever. And he said it doesn't work without Jason Kelce. Is there a plan? And maybe, I heard theories that maybe Saquon was kind of the short yardage insurance policy if the tush push doesn't work anymore. Like, is that still going to be a thing, Zach, without Jason Kelce? Are they going to try it? Is it all and beyond that? So puts so much pressure on Jalen Hurts' neck and all
Yeah.
that stuff that at some point, who knows if he could do it for 10 more years anyway? But like, what is the future of the tush push?
Yeah, that's a good question that we'll try to figure out here. Landon Dickerson's a big part of it. He's still
Yep,
here. Cam Jurgens knows the tricks of the trade in terms of getting
yep,
low.
of course.
I mean, Jalen Hurts can still squat 500 plus pounds, right? They're figuring out their right guard situation. I think it's going to be Tyler Steen. We'll see how that goes. We'll see whether Kelce was the key of it or if it was the whole group. As Kelce would say, it's the whole team. That said, it's not one of these things that you can kind of troubleshoot during practice. They don't
Mm-hmm.
practice the tush push, right? It's something that they do in games. So I think we'll have a better sense early in the season. Certainly having Saquon helps, but I imagine if they have the success rate, the 93%, so to speak, that they had in the past, they'll continue using it with Jalen Hurts.
You can take this anywhere you want it. I'm going to leave it very simple for you. What the hell happened last year, Zach Berman?
Yeah, as a beat reporter, I've been trying to figure that out now for months, and I'm curious what you think in these situations. Is it better if it's one thing, or if it's better
Okay.
if it's a dozen different things? Because I personally think if it's one big thing, you can rectify it. You can change the personnel here. You can change the coach, whatever. I think it was a dozen different things. First off, it was the onus or the burden that came from losing the Super Bowl, that Super Bowl hangover, the pressure that kind of went into everything. It was the fact that they actually weren't playing particularly well when they were 10-1. They were getting by games, and there was a regression to the mean. There was Nick Sirianni said at the end of the season, the offense got stale. I don't think they did enough to evolve offensively. I think what they tried to do was refine and perfect offensively. And as Jason Kelce said, opposing defenses spent the entire offseason last year trying to figure out the Eagles. Personnel wise, they were not as good. The luck factor certainly affected them a little bit more. And then they faced a gauntlet in that mid to late season where every week they were facing top quarterbacks. You're going from Patrick Mahomes to Josh Allen. They're playing the Niners in there. They're playing the Cowboys in there. There's these types of teams every week. And I think when the Niners beat them, I'm testing the memory of some of your listeners. The Eagles were 9-3 in 2014. Chip Kelly's second year.
Yeah, of course.
They just beat the Cowboys on Thanksgiving with Mark Sanchez. They play Seattle 10 days later, and Seattle just decimated them, like physically beat them up. And I remember covering the Eagles then, and it was like, oh man, we're not at Seattle's level. And it was almost like that a bit with San Fran last year. San Fran came into Philly and beat them up, and the Eagles just were not the same after that game. So I think it was a dozen different things that kind of factored into it, and they just ran out of gas at the end.
Jalen Hurts was hurt, right?
Yes, he was
Yeah.
hurt middle of the season, got a little bit better, hurt his thumb in week 18, and was not himself in the playoffs.
So it's funny you mentioned the Chip Kelly thing because what happened the year after with Chip Kelly? Like, so they went 10-6 twice with Chip Kelly. Is that right?
Yep,
They didn't
yeah,
make the
they went
playoffs the
10
second
6, 10
time.
6, and then Chip was fired
Yeah.
at 6-9.
Then
Yeah.
Chip was fired at 6-9 when he moved the holiday party to like a Tuesday afternoon. Did you go to the holiday party, Zach? Did you even see it? Were you just like, what the hell is going on? Why is there a holiday party on Tuesday?
No, well, I knew it was not where it typically is, right? And they were set it up actually in the team facility that year, so that struck me as odd. But I didn't realize until after the fact all the back channel problems that went along with that.
I'll tell you something. If a company has a holiday party at Tuesday or whatever it is, whatever weekday it was in the afternoon, there's deeper issues. All right, so obviously Nick Sirianni goes in the meeting. I thought that your former colleague Jeff McClain had a very concise tweet a couple of months ago before the meeting where he said, listen, Doug Peterson went into this same meeting that Nick Sirianni went into. And the assumption from almost everybody was he was going to keep his job. This is Doug now.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey Lurie didn't like the plan, didn't like the loyalty to certain assistants, it sounds like, and he left that meeting without a job. Nick Sirianni goes into that meeting and keeps his job. Two-pronged question, but I'll start here. What did he do to keep his job?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that year up. I think the other part too was where the roster was. If you go back to the Doug Peterson era, I think Jeffrey Lurie in particular, and I don't want to speak for Howie, but I think at that time the Eagles kind of saw that they need to reset, and they thought that if Doug doubled down on kind of the personnel that he wanted or the coaching personnel that he wanted, uh, they wouldn't have that reset. So there was kind of as Jeffrey called it, a difference of vision. I don't know if there was a difference of vision this time around. It was more just like, what's your idea? Because within the building, the Eagles very much view it like they're a Super Bowl contender. This roster's built to win. They have players in the primes of their career. They've managed the cap well during these past few years. They have a 25, 26-year-old quarterback, right? So they view it like they just need to maximize the personnel they had here. And I think that's where they wanted to make those coordinator changes. And the fact that Nick was receptive to it and Nick made those changes, and they bring in Kellen Moore, an established coach who by the way was up for the job in 2021 when Nick got hired. Vic Fangio, who the Eagles wanted to hire last year to replace Jonathan Gannon. I think they were pleased with what that vision was this time. It was kind of it was consistent with where they were as an organization. I imagine if there was reluctant to make change, then there would be kind of a different avenue they would have pursued.
Is he having said all that on tenuous ground this year? Like, what's the threshold where you're like, okay, he's absolutely safe going into 2025?
Yeah, this is the way I would frame it. In one sense, in 3 years as a head coach, he has made the playoffs all 3 years, made the Super Bowl 1 year, had double-digit wins twice. Like any other organization, you would look at that and you would say that this guy's safe. And I think Nick's a really good coach. That said, if the Eagles underachieve this year, I can tell you this: they're not going to look at Howie Roseman and say you didn't build a good roster. They're not going to look at Jalen Hurts and say we don't believe in you at quarterback. So of those three, they'll look at the head coach. The other part of this too is that when you hear all this Bill Belichick talk, this is not something that talk radio is doing on a Wednesday in May to try to fill time. Like this is ESPN, Seth Wickersham, Don Van Nander, two of the best in the business. I would say the two best investigative reporters in the business. They have a Belichick story where they're literally saying that the Eagles had conversations about Belichick at the end of the year. At the Tom Brady roast, they're casually mentioning Bill Belichick and Kevin Hart about the Eagles job, right? So I bring that up as a way of saying this is very much in like the NFL zeitgeist right now is what's going to happen with this Eagles job if it does not go well. So I think what the Eagles need to do is not underachieve. I mean, Nick Sirianni, if in that building, it's hard not to like him. If you get to know Nick, like you see why he's well regarded like as a person because he has that type of personality. He works well with Howie Roseman. But like I said, if they don't fulfill the potential, the promise that this roster has, it's not going to be on Howie and it's not going to be on Jalen.
Few things from that. Number one, I did not, and this is so talk radio of me. I was texting somebody in the league after the Giants game, the Giants playoff game 2 years ago, with Sirianni's mugging for the camera, and I thought it's like, all right, man, this is a little much. And I texted someone who knows Nick, and they said, "You're wrong.
Yeah,
we expect stoicism from coaches. And by the way, this person said the stoicism is usually a put on. It's usually a facade. The guys who are stoic are normally complete lunatics as soon as the cameras aren't off them, or they're busybodies or they're micromanagers or whatever. So like you can't judge a book by its cover. And he's just a different style of coach that we're not used to and that I should get used to it." And I was like, okay, point well taken. Fine. The Eagles, you mentioned, like in any other building, Nick Sirianni would be safe. They fired Andy Reid. They fired Chip Kelly after, as we just said, won 20 games in his first 2 years. They fired Doug Peterson after he won one of the best Super Bowls. There was an outlet the other day that just asked me to rank the 50 best games in history. And I put that Doug Peterson, Nick Foles Super Bowl at like fourth. Like I still think about that game constantly. I wanted to put it at number one.
It got me a book deal, so I would
there you
agree
go.
with you.
Hey,
yeah.
Hey, we're getting beach houses, man. We're gonna be next to the Kelces, and so I think there's a tax that you have to pay. I think that in most years, not the last year of Doug Peterson maybe, but in most years, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman think they've given you a Super Bowl ready roster, and the tax on that is you cannot have a bad year. You cannot, and you add in the desirability of this job, where if they're at 7-6 in week 15, there's going to be people, and this happens all the time. The one thing you and I have probably learned over the past decade that we didn't know outside of this is that all of these things get determined in October and November and December. And hey, I remember there was a GM and a coach package that got put together after the season. And somebody was like, oh yeah, they linked up in August and they knew they were going to be a package. It's like, wait, what? They didn't tell anybody? Like so much of this stuff is pro wrestling as far as hiring and firing goes. With the Eagles, it's going to be really, as you just said, is going to be based on the success this season. But there's going to be, if they're 7-6 and that roster looks good, there's going to be back channeling with Bill Belichick. There's going to be back channeling with Mike Vrabel. There's going to be back channeling with whatever hot coordinator, maybe Ben Johnson. Maybe that's the spot that Ben Johnson wants to be in when it's not Washington and it's not some of these other Carolina. It's not one of those places. That's the problem that Nick Sirianni faces if he underachieves. This is a good job that Howie and Jeffrey could get an A-plus coach for in a minute. And I think that a lot of that works against it to the point that I think they have to win the division. And it can't be like a 9-8 division win. I think it's got to be double-digit wins plus a division, in my opinion.
Yeah, so a few things there. First off, to what you said at the start, I agree with the person you spoke to in the league 100%. Like, what makes sense about Nick, why it works with Nick, is that he's authentically him. He's not putting on a show. Like, that's
Yep.
it. Now, it can be grating at
This
times.
person said to me, "I love Dan Campbell for his authenticity,
Yeah.
and I hate Nick Sirianni for it." And I was like, "That's a pretty good point." I don't hate Nick Sirianni, by the way. I'm just joking. But like,
No,
I see authenticity in Dan. I saw a lack of authenticity in Nick, and that didn't. It turns out this person was like, "You have it all wrong."
Yeah, well, I can tell you when they're losing, it's certainly not it's not the popular approach. Let's say higher up in the organization, but what makes Nick who he is that he is authentic, and I do think that was authentically him. To your point about the nature of the job, you are correct about that. Now, I know Jeffrey Lurie takes particular pride in his ability to identify coaches. If you think about it, he's the last 4 coaches he's hired. Chip Kelly's the only one who received an interview anywhere else during that cycle. Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, Nick Sirianni, none of them were interviewed elsewhere during the cycle. All of them made the playoffs within the first 2 years. All of them have made the Super Bowl. Now, obviously Nick and Andy didn't win in Philly, but I bring it up as a way of saying, don't necessarily think that the Eagles would just kind of go after the quote unquote hot coordinator. That said, the Eagles are at a different stage of roster construction than they've been in their other times hiring a coach. And that's what goes to kind of the pressure that's on Nick Sirianni. When you talk about this offense, and Jeffrey Lurie thinks you need offense to win, there are like 12-team fantasy football leagues that don't have an offensive roster like the Eagles. I mean, if you look at A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, it's hard to find a group as good as, or I should say better than that in the NFL. The Eagles drafted the corner they felt was the best in the draft. He was the top corner drafted in the draft. They just signed Bryce Huff to $15 million year contract. You go on down the list. They think they have a lot of talent in this building. They think they can win a Super Bowl. So if they underachieve at a significant way, I'm not talking making the championship game and losing, but if they collapse at the end of the year, if they're a middling team, then yeah, you probably look at it and you say, not which coach is the best for the next 5 to 8 years. It's which coach is the best for next season to win, because they have a window here, especially with the offensive talent. Saquon's going to be on the team the next 2 years. Devontae, A.J. Brown are going to be on the team the next 4 years. Jalen Hurts is going to be on the team the next 4, 4+. So they have this window here. And I should mention Lane Johnson, probably 2 years left. Jordan Mailata, one of the top left tackles in the league. Landon Dickerson, they signed him to be the highest paid guard in the league. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have worked for years to kind of have this type of offensive talent, and really this year is about maximizing it. And when you think about the coordinator changes, Vic Fangio, in my opinion, is really here to raise the baseline, right? What they want is one of the top offenses in the league and a defense that won't lose it for you. A defense, and Vic Fangio, he doesn't always have top 5 defenses, but he's not going to be bottom 5 in the league. And I think that's kind of the premise behind both of these hires.
That's fascinating. The point of this episode, we're going to call "What the hell is going on in the NFC East?" because the Cowboys have very similar problems to the Eagles. It sounds like you think internally the expectation at NovaCare is Super Bowl. Is that realistic? Just given, because I'm of two minds here, because I see the roster and I see the blue chip players that you're describing. Yeah. I also see the Jason Kelce departure. I see a couple of Fletcher Cox departure. I see a couple other things that give me pause. But on the other hand, like I saw that roster in the second half of last season where it seemed like they were in a complete tailspin. There was nothing they could do. Like I felt like I was doing Chris Long's podcast last week, and it's like the fact that that much talent went into a Tampa team that was just okay, with no expectation of them winning, and then they didn't really put up a fight in that game.
Yeah.
That to me showed that there was some real there was an unrecoverable stall that it was going to take a lot, and I don't know how you go from that to Super Bowl, but I've seen crazier things.
Yeah, I would frame it as it's not Super Bowl is the expectation, but competing for the Super Bowl. And what I mean by that is, the Eagles look fondly, relatively speaking, at that Andy Reid run in the mid 2000s when they were in the NFC Championship game 4 years in a row. They made the Super Bowl only one time there. But what that showed is that every year you have a team that can win it. And there's as you know, there's so much variance that kind of goes into actually winning it. Like it's hard to win, but if you're in the mix for getting there, that's really what they're shooting for. So they need to be one of those teams that's in the mix for getting there. As far as your questions about this team, you're absolutely right. The best teams the Eagles have had, it's when they're dominant on the lines of scrimmage. So
Mm-hmm.
they lost a Hall of Fame center, a potential Hall of Fame defensive tackle on Fletcher Cox, certainly a franchise Hall of Famer and one of the best players in franchise history. So right there, you lost two key pieces on your lines of scrimmage. They traded their best defensive player, at least from my perspective, and that's
Mm-hmm.
Hassan Reddick. So you're replacing key players on both sides there. They have incredible skill position talent. There's no question about that. But there's questions about their depth on the offensive line. I mean, Lane Johnson, when he's on the field, he's the best right tackle in the league. He hasn't
Mm-hmm.
played a full season, I think, since 2015. If they lose Lane, if they lose Jordan Mailata, there are questions there. On the interior of offensive line, they moved Cam Jurgens from right guard to center. Now they replace Jurgens at right guard. So you have two spots that are in question. On the defensive line, they're really relying on Jalen Carter to not just be good, but to be great. And he has that
Mm-hmm.
talent in him. And then they're relying on Bryce Huff to become what Hassan Reddick was 2 years ago, kind of the emerging pass rusher. That's what they paid him to be. The factors are there. The pieces are there for them to be one of the best teams in the NFL, for them to be on the doorstep and win. But this is it's not the type of thing, and Vegas will tell you that they're
Mm-hmm.
not top three, top four in Super Bowl odds, right? They need to get past San Fran, so it's not a given, but the ingredients are there for sure.
It's funny you mentioned the lines. I told the story before, but I was talking to someone the year after they won the Super Bowl. I was doing this whole story about how the using analytics and the way they managed the cap and all this stuff, and I was at NovaCare, and I'm talking and 1 year deals, rental, basically 1 year rentals, almost like baseball, to see what they like, and then signing extensions or not signing extensions based on their experience. And I'm talking to somebody high up there, and they go, "Would you shut up?" And I was like, "What?" And then, being tongue in cheek, and they were like, "We won the Super Bowl because we were strong on the lines,
Yeah.
and everything else is a tiebreaker. Everything else is helps, and we're not going to run from it. But like, we won the Super Bowl because we were strong on the offensive and defensive lines. That's why we got there. Everything else is just helping." And I think that's probably the best lesson in modern football there is. It can change. It become a passing league. It can become all of these little things. You can have to have two great wide receivers, all that stuff. But that's after you solve the offensive and defensive lines. That's absolutely after it. So it's going to be fascinating year. Zach Berman, you're the best. Bo Wolf is from my hometown. Sorry, excuse me. Let me rephrase that. Bo Wolf's hometown is where I live now
Okay.
in New York. I feel like his recommendations have been bad. All the places he liked when he was a kid have closed down. He's got no new
Yeah,
Rex. He doesn't have his
it's
finger on the pulse of Larchmont.
I gotta tell you, I am gonna see him in an hour. We have our show in 2 hours. I'm gonna bring this up to him, and I
I
think we
was
can
like,
we
"What?"
can create a
I
little
was like,
beef
"Where
here.
do
I
I
like that.
go?" I was like, "Where do I go?" And he's like, "I don't know. Everything's gone." I was like,
I
"Wow."
yeah yeah. I don't know Larchmont, but I could tell you where to go down the shore to see Jason and Kylie Kelce in the parking lot. I can promise.
That's
you
all
that.
I need.
Yes.
That's all I need. All right, man. All right, beers on me and Larchmont. Bo Wolf would make the drive up. Zach Berman, thanks so much, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words. Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. All right, Jori Epstein is here. She's a senior NFL reporter for Yahoo Sports. She's a good person to answer the
let's
question.
just stop there. A good person.
Yeah,
Love
there you
it.
go. A good person to answer the question, what the hell is going on in the NFC East? She covered the Cowboys for many years. She's a Dallas native. Is that correct?
I am.
Wow. She lives in New York now. She was at Giants camp last week. Is
Also
that right?
accurate. Yes.
Wow.
No lies
nailing
told
this.
yet.
I'm nailing this. All right, we're going to start here with the Giants because once we start on the Cowboys, we're not going to stop. We just had Zach
Right.
Berman on and talk about the Eagles. The Cowboys, however popular you think the Cowboys are, they're significantly more popular, but they're also just like a very funny organization. So once you start talking about them, you just cannot stop. So we'll do a little Giants talk before this. You were listening to Daniel Jones' press conference last week. You were reading the tea leaves on what that starting quarterback situation even looks like, what that team even looks like, and we'll start here. What's Daniel Jones' whole deal going into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, he was so funny because Daniel Jones is a pretty even-keeled guy, as you or anyone who has seen anything he has ever done knows. And so he was just talking about, like, I'm pretty fired up to have Malik Neighbors, the receiver they drafted with the 6th overall pick, which, like, he said he was fired up. His tone did not reveal that. So just you can decide whether you believe what he said or how he looked. And then he got to the draft and he was asked quite a few questions about how he felt that the Giants did extensive work on quarterbacks, specifically first-round quarterbacks who would have in theory replaced him, if not at least succeeded him. And he goes, yeah, I mean, I wasn't fired up about it. And it was like, oh, we found something that Daniel Jones was not fired up about. And I think it wasn't only that they were looking at his replacement, because anyone who sees his contract knows that while it was in theory a 4-year deal worth $160 million, it had a 2-year out that will trigger after the 2024 season, where they can part ways with him after this year with very little dead cap hit. This is not the Russell Wilson $85 million to make him leave contract situation. And so you look at that and you say, well, what do the Giants actually want? And to me, it was not only that they were considering replacing him, it was also the communication or lack thereof. Again, you never know how what a player and a coach says to us compares with what actually happened, but taking what everybody said at face value, Daniel Jones was talking about watching the draft and the emotions, and he goes, I was just like everybody else. And a reporter watching the draft, like wondering who we were going to pick. And a reporter said, well, actually, you were like nobody else because this was your job. This was not all of our jobs.
Right.
But what I think Daniel Jones meant was not that he was like everybody else in terms of the impact, but he was like everybody else with the amount of information he was given. I do not get the sense that the front office was keeping him abreast of all of their interviews, their 30 visits, their dinners with quarterbacks, their attempts to trade up potentially for the number 3rd overall pick for Drake May rather than the Patriots. And I do not get the sense that they had much of a conversation with him after, because Joe Shane, their general manager, was asked, did you talk to Daniel? And he's like, yeah, I texted him and let him know we were going to pick Malik Neighbors. And so I think you have a lot of vibes questions in addition to roster questions.
Interesting. Quickly on another team, the other team we're going to give the short end of the stick to in this podcast because there's just two sort of dominant blobs in the division that everybody wants to talk about, but it's the Washington Commanders. Jayden Daniels in year one, and we've talked about this a million times on this show, but like I think they need to go vertical, they need to go aggressive. He's old enough. I don't know where this Commanders project is going generally, but what should the expectations be for him in year one?
For Jayden Daniels, I think what's challenging is that, like, you look at what C.J. Stroud did in Houston last year, and I feel like C.J. Stroud made every rookie quarterback's life harder this year because, to C.J.'s credit, he looked freaking awesome, not only as a rookie quarterback, but also he did this with the Houston Texans. Like, I think we forget how bad they were a year ago, 2 years ago, and 3 years ago because of what they did last year and how instantly they turned it around. But that's not how rookie quarterback life actually goes. I think the Commanders have a long way to go in terms of their roster building project, also their organizational dysfunction, like better now. But I think we saw this week with Brandon McManus and the kicker that like allegations, like they still have a few things they need to keep working through. So I do think that Jayden Daniels is going to have spectacular moments, but to think that he is going to do what CJ Stroud did, I don't think the infrastructure in Washington will allow him to do that, but I hope I'm wrong.
All right, let's get into Cowboys talk. So
You're like, I've had enough of non-Cowboys teams.
no, we're going to get back. We have one final question that's about the entire division, or two final questions about the entire division. See, I'm very fair here. The all-in comment has reverberated around the NFL world for months now. And the point I try to make that you are going to be far more equipped to make, and maybe you disagree with me, but I don't think you do. Jerry Jones sometimes says weird stuff. And you can't really read into too much of what he's saying. And when he's saying we're all in for this year, he probably doesn't mean it in the same way Les Snead means it, or Brett Veach means it, or Chris Greer means it. Okay? If they're ever saying that. You have the floor. What did you make of those comments? And how much do you ever take what Jerry Jones says at face value, Jori?
Yeah, Kevin, you're asking the right questions because the last in-person interview I had with Jerry was in March at the league owners meetings. And that was about 45 minutes on the record, another 20 minutes off the record. You can say a lot of things in 65 minutes, and Jerry did say a lot of things in 65 minutes. And I've been around Jerry long enough. I was around the Cowboys in Dallas for 7 years, and now another year from a distance, to know that if you wait long enough and ask Jerry the same question enough times, he will say everything and its opposite. So I'll give you some examples. During that same interview, so this is not like months later, like people's opinions can change. We allow opinions to change. Jerry Jones told us that he believes Dak is one. There are quarterbacks in the NFL who have not yet won Super Bowls who can win a Super Bowl, and he will put Dak Prescott in that category.
Sure, of course.
Jerry Jones also said within the span of an hour that he doesn't need a quarterback in Dak who can win the games that Cooper Rush will win for him. He needs a quarterback in Dak who will win the games that Cooper Rush cannot win, with the implication that if you look at the San Francisco game last year, if you look at the playoffs in recent years, Dak has not done that. So again, Super Bowl, he can and he will, not doing what the backup's not doing. Okay, another one. Mike McCarthy, their head coach. There were a lot of questions after the debacle against Green Bay in the playoffs this year. Would Mike get fired? In the same press conference, you have Jerry saying, I believe in Mike. He's the guy for this job. And I think he is really one of the reasons I'm optimistic. You also have Jerry Jones saying, I think that one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because we have talented players whom a staff didn't get the most out of and didn't have game plans to get the most out of and can. And so it's sort of like, I remember I'm sitting in the lobby of the hotel where everything's happening. It's 8, 9 p.m. And my bosses are like, where's your story? And I'm like, I can't write a story until I've transcribed the entire thing, because if not, I'm just cherry picking something. And I know I'm cherry picking something. So to end my answer, I'll say that with the all in, the thing about Jerry Jones is never believe he's saying anything and like knowing what he's saying. He's not stupid. He just like likes talking, and so he's not concerned about the consequences of his words. He has that privilege. But what I think you could say the Cowboys are all in on is they are all in on the ability after the 2024 season to do what they want. And so they are all in that they have the cap flexibility, because they didn't do much this free agency, to say we want Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, and we have the cap space because we didn't do anything the year before. They also have the ability to say, we don't want Mike McCarthy, we don't want Dak Prescott, we don't want CeeDee Lamb, and we don't want Micah, or maybe there's one more year until we don't want Micah. So like they really have the ability to go either way. And I don't think that's that crazy, because this is a team that has won 12 games each of the last 3 years and made the NFC Championship in the last 28 years. And so I think it's okay to have that flexibility.
First of all, that was a beautiful breakdown of the essence of Jerry Jones. And you see it even when you describe in March. I was in that hallway. He's sitting down at that chair, the one where he's doing the doodles on.
The doodles. Doodles. Capital T, capital D.
A group of reporters comes to him. They end. Everything kind of loses momentum, and he walks away. He never really ends it. He just kind of loses momentum. People walk away. Then another reporter,
but I have to interrupt you, because at one point he had to go to the bathroom, and he goes, give me a minute. I'll be right back. Don't leave. Like, most people are like, "Please let me leave." Jerry's like, "Wait for me to pee. I
I'm
will be
rolling.
back to
I'm
talk for
rolling right
another
now.
30 minutes."
Right.
Okay,
So then,
continue.
the pack would leave after like 30 minutes, and then another reporter would start talking to him. He would talk to them. They would come back. So we ended up giving 4 or 5 separate press conferences in one afternoon. And I'm watching this, and I'm just saying, there's no what how deep on the roster are we going? Like, how deep into games, like play
Not.
no, we're not, right? So like eventually you're just being asked the same question over and over again, and Jerry's either not tired of asking it, of it being asked, or he's just answering it in slightly different ways every single time. It is that's why I always laugh when I see like Jerry Jones is quoted as saying blank, and it's like, well, I don't know how much we can read into this stuff.
Right. You can, but you also I don't know, he also just, like, isn't logical. I mean, I think the doodles in some ways were more of an accurate and linear interpretation of his brain than the things he said, and that is saying something. Because that was the other funny thing is everyone who's listening to this or watching this, go look up the doodles if you have not seen them. This is basically Jerry Jones scribbling lines on the piece of paper. But what I loved is if you were there, this was not one page.
No.
Jerry went through 4 pages of the notebook. He would emphatically make a point and scribble and this and that and circle and dot. And then he would be like, okay, I'm going to turn the page. And then he would do it all over again. None of it was legible. And apparently, we talked to Mike McCarthy afterwards, and he said that's just kind of what Jerry does. It's like this evil genius, not evil genius, like, yeah, I guess kind of evil genius, mad genius.
Well, it's like a nervous tick, maybe.
Right.
Just anxiety. I
Like some people use their hands, Jerry uses his pen to punctuate his
Yeah,
points.
I have a notebook when I'm on like TV or something like that, and I'll write down words I don't want
Yeah,
to forget,
forget. Right.
but I'll do it in a very emphatic way, and just to just like, oh, I want to make this point, but I'll do it in an emphatic way. But it's not necessarily doodles. But I get it. I see the
But
vision from
there are
Jerry.
words
They are
when you do
words.
it.
They are words. Speaking of Mike McCarthy, he has a job. Why? Like
I love
I
it.
know that sounds cruel, but I
Well, wait,
have
why don't we start by answering for yourself?
yeah.
Kevin Clark has a job. Why?
I mean, I ask that question every single day.
Right.
Every single day, I ask that question. I don't know if Mike McCarthy is.
Okay. Here's my thought. One, Jerry likes comfort. Two,
Hmm.
the man did win 12 games each of the last 3 years. So what I think it is unfair to say Mike McCarthy is another Jason Garrett. They're very different temperamentally. They're also different in what they've done success-wise. I think that Jason Garrett was good every other year, which is like almost impressive. Like it's so hard to do anything predictably in the NFL that to be good and make the playoffs every other year. That was Jason Garrett's thing. Mike McCarthy has sustained regular season success over 3 years. He also, in 2023, for the first time, took over the offense, kind of redesigned it, helped Dak and the receivers get on the same page. And statistically, Dak led the league in passing touchdowns, and he had one of the best years of his career. I think what's challenging with all of this is that the Cowboys need players, coaching staff, and a group as a whole to, again, going back to the Cooper Rush comment, win when it matters most, not when it matters least. I was talking to uh, a defensive coach from, let's just say, a division that is much more competitive than the NFC East
Sure, of course.
at the combine. And the guy was like, 12 wins every year. I could win 12 games a year if I was in the NFC East and playing the Giants twice a year and the Commanders twice a year and the Eagles during their implosion. And I think that what's challenging is the Cowboys might actually be more of like a 9-win team if they were to play the average schedule, if they were to play in the NFC West, the AFC North, like some of these teams. But because they're in the NFC East, they're a 12-win team. And so you have that problem where you think you're a little better than you are, and thus you shouldn't make a change. So I would say that's part of the reasons why Mike McCarthy has a job. I do think he's a good coach. I think the question is, can he overcome the specter of the Cowboys culture and all of the distractions to win in the playoffs? And I don't know that he can.
I think that's tied to Dak's performance this year and whether or not Dak stays this time next year. If I'm asking you, if your job depends on you accurately putting a number on it, 50%, 80%, 98%, where are you going with Dak Prescott being a Cowboy in 2025?
I'll say 65%. I think that Dak wants to stay there. He does
Mhm.
like the culture. He's really good for the Cowboys quarterback role in the sense of you have to do a lot more than quarterback to be the Cowboys quarterback, and Dak is excellent at those things. I think that part of that percentage-wise is not knowing how 2024 goes. Dak holds the cards. He cannot be tagged. He cannot be traded. He cannot be forced to stay in Dallas. He can be encouraged to stay in Dallas, and he's going to make money wherever he goes. That's just the way that the position is and the way Dak's performance is. And so the question is, well, if 2024 goes terribly, maybe Dak wants to leave. Selfishly, I would like Dak to come to the New York Giants because I live in New York and I would like to cover him locally again. So, like, football gods, listen to this. But
With the
I don't.
Jets,
I think it's more likely than not he's in Dallas. But I think that because he holds the cards and because we don't know what 2024 looks like and what the coaching staff will look like, I don't think we should be too sure. What's your percentage?
I think that he's going to reach true free agency, and I don't think we've seen that before because he's better than Kirk Cousins was. The perception of him is better than Kirk Cousins was. And I think that when he gets on the open market, he's going to get an offer that is unlike anything we've ever seen. And I don't think the Cowboys, who are notoriously caught flat footed constantly, who never handle their business early, I don't think that they're going to anticipate that. If I had to
Yeah.
guess. Now, the question is who has that kind of money and that kind of desperation? Like, that was always my thing this year with the Bears, where people were like, well, maybe they should, and this was months ago. Remember, it was, well, maybe they should keep Justin Fields and rip off some
Right.
team. Well, you already ripped off the most desperate team in the Carolina Panthers. And you can't do that again. The Panthers are spoken for. They don't have any picks anymore. And so I'm looking around and saying, who has the money, has the desperation, has the owner who wants to write those kind of checks, but also doesn't have a plan at quarterback? And it's kind of hard. I mean, like, the Falcons have been desperate for years. They have too much credibility at the quarterback position now.
They do
Um,
not need. If they add Dak, that would be insane. Dak,
I
Kirk
don't.
Cousins, and Michael Penix all in the same quarterback room. Go crazy.
Um, I'm trying to rack my brain. You know, the Browns did it a couple of years ago, where they said, "Let's give $230 million guaranteed to Deshaun Watson because we're totally desperate." Um, teams that have borderline, hey, we're going to sign this guy or not, they're all capped out. The Dolphins are an extremely expensive roster and are only to get more expensive. Um, I'm trying to kind of rack my brain around this. I mean, the Titans? Like, would the
See, my
Titans do
thought
it?
is though, like Dak has already made really good money with his first mega deal and his endorsements. I don't think he's going to go somewhere primarily based on money. I'm not saying he doesn't care at all. Obviously, his agent Todd France will have a say in this as well, but I think he will prioritize wanting to win a Super Bowl over getting the most money, as long as it is a respectable amount of money for the market and for his ability.
Counterpoint,
Go
it's
for it.
really hard to turn down a lot, like unbelievable amounts of money, to be like the highest paid player, to be like A-Rod with the Rangers, where you're like, oh my
Right.
God, we just signed a contract we didn't think was possible. Um, the Raiders would be interesting, but I don't think Mark Davis is that kind of owner. There's
Really?
not a lot of
I
evidence
feel
that
like a
it's
lot of people think Mark Davis is that kind of owner.
what's like what's the all-in move he's made in the past.
That's a good point.
He let John Gruden trade away a bunch of his guys.
He
Didn't
let
sign
John
new
Gruden do a lot of
extensions.
stuff.
He let John Gruden do a lot of stuff. The Commanders have a plan at quarterback with Jayden Daniels.
Right.
I think the scenario, the best guard that the Cowboys have against the scenario I described is that I'm not seeing an obvious solution. The
Yeah.
Vikings, again, the Vikings just spent a first round pick on JJ McCarthy. The Bears are spoken for.
Steelers.
Um, I don't think they're that kind of team. They
Yeah.
also have a lot of expensive players. The Saints find money in the banana stand at all times, but they have Derek Carr
Right.
for forever. They've got
I mean, both New York teams don't have a plan after 2024 necessarily.
I agree with that. That's why I threw out the Jets. Yeah, it's possible. But do the Maras want to reset the entire NFL salary structure? The Jets might. Woody Johnson
I was
might.
going to say the Jets are willing to go get Aaron Rodgers, and they don't have to trade for Dak, whoever's doing this.
Mm-hmm. Seahawks, Cardinals, both, I presume.
I don't trust Sean Payton to not do it.
When does the Russell Wilson dead money stop happening?
Never.
When does it becomes part of the team?
Yeah. This is $85 million. Let's see.
I'm looking here. I'm not even sure how I read this when it stops paying out.
Broncos salary cap over the cap.
Career earnings. He made $39 million this year.
I think he's $53 million on the books this year.
This year, is that it? And then a certain percentage.
No. I think that's of the 85.
All right.
So 2025, it looks like he is. Does it show? 32.
It's tough. It's going to be tough to sign Dak Prescott to a league-changing contract in Denver. Anyway, the best, as I said, the Cowboys should thank their lucky stars that it seems like the teams that are desperate enough have solved their quarterback problem. However, there's a lot of teams.
Seattle?
I threw, or Arizona if Kyler Murray doesn't perform this year. Anyway, I'm not even sure what the salary cap situation is. Okay, but let's put that aside. The best thing going for Dallas right now is so many desperate teams solved their quarterback problem in the first round this year, which is what happens in the first round when there's 6 quarterbacks to go. Having said that, I think it's going to happen more and more. People are like, oh, well, the next year's draft is so bad. That's why these guys got overdrafted. There's no quarterbacks next draft. I think the transfer portal has fundamentally changed football to the point that you're going to see guys get into schemes, get into offenses where they're going to pop from one year to the next. Nobody was talking about Jayden Daniels as second overall pick this time last year. Not any person. And then he was, people were like, oh, he might be the best quarterback in the job. We're going to see versions of that this year. There's a lot, and people we don't even there were 6 quarterbacks in the first round. 3 of them were direct results of the transfer portal.
Teddy Clark, the quarterback next year.
Dude, Teddy Clark went to his first baseball game over the weekend, and he
played.
He was a Red Sox Brewers game, but he did not play, but he could have. He was at Fenway Park. We watched maybe 6 outs, and it was the most fun he's ever had. He met the Red Sox mascot Wally, and he didn't know what was going on. And
Wally met Teddy.
Yeah, and he just tried to hand Wally a baseball. And I don't know what it was a power move. He was just like, "This is my offer. Take it or leave it. I'm handing you a baseball.
This is my offer to the baseball gods.
This is my offer to the baseball gods." He had a good time. The thing about baseball is it's much better when you don't watch baseball. So we paid like $60 a person to just run around Fenway Park for 2 hours. I highly recommend the experience.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So the 6 quarterbacks 3 of them were direct results of the transfer portal, not even counting Caleb Williams. And so we're going to see more and more of those. So maybe if there's guys that pop, maybe the market for Dak isn't what we think. I just think it only takes one team. All right, so I will
tell you, last thing on that note, I don't think the Cowboys will be stupid enough to use that point directly to Dak, maybe to Todd France, not to Dak. If the Cowboys say, you don't have a better option than us, and that's why you should stay, I think that would inch Dak closer out the door. I'm not saying he would decide it, but I do think Dak would be like, screw you. Like, yes, I do.
But they're also a weird franchise that does weird stuff.
True.
How about that? 4 pages of doodles. All right, so the point of this show is what the hell is going on with the NFC East? Is there a team, and most of these teams, all these teams well, is there a team that can actually, from this division, make the Super Bowl?
Okay, the Cowboys have the talent to make the Super Bowl, but until someone figures out how to overcome the culture and the distractions and the country club situation going on there, I will believe it when I see it. I hope I'm wrong. And I'm not saying the players. This is like a Jerry and facility situation. I think the Eagles could. I mean, I think the Eagles should be better than last year. I think that if Jalen Hurts returns to the level he played at 2 years ago, They still have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They also added Saquon Barkley. I don't understand how they both added this guy and are not paying him, and if he can stay healthy. And then they got 2 really solid DBs in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean in the first couple rounds. Vic Fangio should help their defense. I mean, I think that if someone from the NFC East is making it to the Super Bowl, it's the Eagles, and not only because they were recently there, but because the talent was there last year. The Cowboys would be my next guess. I don't see how you make it to the Super Bowl with Daniel Jones, and I don't see how the Commanders and Jayden Daniels' first year coming off everything they've come off as a franchise make it. But that would be quite the story if they do.
One thing you wanted to bring up, I think is interesting. 4 new defensive philosophies there. What influence is that going to have on the NFC East race this year?
Yeah, it's also a question that I don't totally know the answer to, but I do think that we're going to see all of these different looks, and I want to know like the same way of what's Dak going to do, what's Jalen Hurts going to do, how Jayden Daniels' season's going to go, and what Daniel Jones. Like I do think all of this will be influenced by their ability to adjust to a whole lot of new defensive looks. I think Vic Fangio probably will bring a lot of things that Philly needed last year. Also, hopefully his players think he's more of a, quote, great guy than the Dolphins did or whatever that situation was. I don't know the answer, but I do think it's interesting. I think in Dallas, Mike Zimmer also will be a little more of a disciplinarian, which is also interesting because I think we have a lot of very like laissez-faire offensive coordinators in the NFC East right now, and not necessarily that in defenses. And it'll be interesting to see if just from like a kind of going to the next level in the career, the type of personality of Cliff Kingsbury and Kellen Moore is what these quarterbacks need.
Jori, thank you, pal. I learned a lot about doodles.
That's my specialty. So
read her at Yahoo Sports. A lot of my friends are there, including Jori. She wrote a book called The Upstander that you should also buy. Thanks, pal.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Kevin.